Hi everyone, so we're going to finish up the skeletal system here with some different lifespan changes. So as we know, this is talking about over age, how our bones are going to react. So incremental decrease in the height begins about the age of 30. So it might seem pretty young, but it's very, very small amounts that are changing here. Gradually, bone loss is going to exceed bone replacement. So our osteoclasts, that chew bone, are going to work harder than our osteoblasts and gradually make our bones a little bit more fragile and weak. So bone loss occurs more rapidly in postmenopausal women than in men. So women are actually going to see more bone loss as they age rather than men. By the age of 70, bone loss is about the same at the same rate. And aging is going to increase the risk of bone fractures because we know that those osteoclasts are chewing the bone, so that's decreasing the density of that bone, which is going to make an increase of fractures here. So let's talk about fractures. So fractures are any type of break in the bone, whether that be a simple or compound fracture. So the first one we're going to talk about is a simple fracture. So this is a break in the bone that does not pierce the skin. So this would be something like stress fractures, things like that, that do not break the skin in any way. A compound fracture is going to be one that does pierce the skin. So again, when that bone breaks, if it pierces through the skin, we're going to see a compound fracture. If not, we're going to see a simple fracture. So if we look at a couple different fractures here, we have green stick, which is an incomplete break of our bone. So we can see here on this bone that we only have partial break in the bone, and it occurs on this convex surface. It kind of is a bend of the bone or a break in that kind of way. If we look at our next one, we see a fissure fracture. So this is a longitudinal, so up and down break of our bone. This break doesn't really go full through. This is what you might call a stress fracture as well, where it's not a full break of the bone in any way. A communed fracture is the complete fragmentation of the bone. So this bone is completely destroyed here. This would probably be a compound fracture. And if not, this one would definitely require surgery to grab all those pieces and try to put them back together in the bone. So this is definitely a surgical case. Okay. If we take a look at a transverse fracture, this is a pretty clean bone break across the bone lengthwise. So this transverse fracture occurs at this axis of the bone. And this is probably, again, depending on the severity and the density of the bone that is broken like this, it might require surgery as well. An oblique fracture is a break that occurs at an angle here. So we can see that angle coming across. And it across that axis here. Again, most of the time when we see a full break of the bone like this, that it's completely off, we're going to see a possible need for surgery depending on the severity again. And then our last type of fracture is a spiral fracture. So this is actually due to twisting of the bone. So again, we can see that full break. And these last four here, there's a possibility that these would be compound fractures. Because that bone has broken completely, there's a good chance that it might pierce the skin and become that compound fracture.
Randy, to the main office, please. Randy, main office.
Okay, so let's take a look at the healing process of these bones. So our first process here, Once that bone breaks, we're also breaking the blood vessels that run in between in that medullary cavity. So we're going to see a release of blood into that space, which we call a hematoma. Okay, so we'll see that break. We see this hematoma form. So once we get to a more healing process, we'll move on to 2 over here, and we'll see that spongy bone is going to start developing in this area where the break is. We're also going to see fibrocartilage occur here and a reconnection of these blood vessels. They're going to reconnect and make those. Our next one, we're going to see a bony callus form. So the bone isn't fully formed here, but our callus is going to replace this fibrocartilage that was created in this top part and make it more solid and easy to, not as easily to break again. And then finally, our last step, we can see this is where the break is. It's very clear. It's actually very interesting because where breaks have occurred, you see these bulges of bone on either side because the osteoblasts overput bone there because there was so much stress in that area. And it actually takes over a year for your bone to return back to its original shape. So we'll see that we have these indents over here. So it takes over a year for our bone to go back to that smooth structure. So that's where our osteoclasts have to come in and start reshaping the bone so it fits back. It's actually more dangerous after you've broken a bone to break it in a place either above or below because those places are weaker than the place where you actually just broke your bone, which I think is pretty interesting. It's going to be really important to know these different steps. We're going to be talking about them and doing extra work with them. So I would definitely make note of this image and the different steps that are occurring. So remember, our step 1, our blood vessels have broken. We're seeing a hematoma, which is actually just a really kind of like a large blood clot. Step 2, we're going to see spongy bone form and fibrocartilage form in between it. Step 3, we're going to see that bony callus form, replacing that fibrocartilage. Step 4, our bone is technically healed at this point, but it's disshaped, so our osteoclasts are going to come in to help reshape that bone. So remember those steps. We're going to be talking about them. This will definitely be questions when we get to the test for this section. Okay? So if you have any questions for me, make sure you reach out and ask.